In lesson 3.2, we're going to be looking at measures of variation and how to calculate some of them in Excel. Now to start off, we should define what variation is. In general, variation can be thought of as a measurement of how spread out the data in a set of data is. So if your data set is more spread out, if the numbers in it are more spread out, then your variation will be higher. If the numbers are all closer together, then your variation will be lower. We're going to look at a few different measures of variation in this lesson and in the future. The range, which hopefully you remember from earlier classes, is just the maximum value minus the minimum value in a data set. The interquartile range, which we actually won't look at today, but we'll look at in the future. And then the standard deviation and variance, which I'll explain a little bit more when we get to them. So first, to calculate range, there are some kind of fancy ways to do this in Excel, but the easiest is honestly to do something we've already done before, which is just to sort our data set and then do the maximum value minus the minimum value. There are a number of ways you can do this. I always like to add a filter to my data set. So I'm going to go, highlight it, go to Data, Filter, and now I can sort my data ascending. We'll go from the lowest number up to the highest number. So now to calculate the range, I'm going to put an equals sign, and then click on that highest number, minus, click on that lowest number. And boom, there is my range in this data set. Standard deviation and variance, Excel actually has formulas that we can calculate them directly. Now, to explain what these are, standard deviation is essentially measuring, on average, how far away are your data points from the mean. The formula for it is pretty complicated, so we're not going to be doing this by hand, but that's okay. So for our standard deviation, we have two different formulas we can use depending on if we are using a sample of data or if our data is for the entire population. Generally speaking, in stats, we're going to be using samples. We're not going to know the entire population, so we will be using STDEV, so standard deviation, dot S for sample most of the time, equals STDEV dot S, open parentheses, and now I can highlight my data set. And then I close my parentheses and hit enter. So this tells me my standard deviation for this data set is 16.4. Now, without comparing it to another data set, that doesn't necessarily tell us much, but this is a measure of how spread out our data is. Variance is similar to standard deviation. Actually, mathematically, to find the variance, you can just square the standard deviation. And variance is used a little bit less in reporting out stats, but there are some further calculations where it can be useful. And it also has a formula built right in. Again, we're using the sample version most of the time, so variance.s for sample, open parentheses, highlight our data, close parentheses, hit enter, and it will spit out our variance. And we're going to look in the next problem at an application of using measures of variation, but for now, these are the formulas. This is how we can calculate some of them.